Just a quick warning before we begin, but obviously this video will contain visual spoilers for the different lands around Epic Universe, and to a smaller extent, I'll be discussing a small bit of content from many of the rides. So, Epic Universe is obviously dominating the discussion within the theme park community, and from what has come out about the park, I've expressed my excitement about it for years now. Universal's parks had a really rough decade throughout the 2010s, but they really turned around with 2019's Hagrid's at Islands of Adventure. Since that point, Universal has certainly had a few duds here and there, but have also created incredible attractions such as the Velocicoaster, the Secret Life of Pets Off the Leash, the Jurassic World retheme of Jurassic Park The Ride, a fantastic, innovative show with the Bourne Stuntacular, and of course, the astoundingly ambitious Jurassic World Adventure in Beijing. For all of its flaws, even Hollywood's smaller and cheaper Super Nintendo World has proven to be an incredible hit. This was all just the beginning of what Universal had to offer, and now the company has hit a major milestone with Epic Universe, a park that, on first impression, exudes excellence throughout every corner. Reactions to the park are not what I've expected though, and I've actually seen a lot of negativity and disappointment surrounding it, whether it be people complaining about issues with sightlines, or otherwise complaining that the park doesn't live up to the hype as the world's most ambitious theme park. The way I experienced it, I was lucky enough to be invited by a few different friends I know for previews of the park, twice before the filming policy was lifted, and luckily twice after, so I do have footage of it that I can show you. I've probably been more than the average person already, and so because I was able to do almost everything that the park offers and have experienced certain attractions multiple times, I can give you more rounded thoughts than other people who either went once or otherwise applied for the media preview, where it appears that everyone was just shuffled around to see the major rides as quickly as possible. In contrast, I've spent a lot of time exploring the lands and their details, walking through the shops, and dining in the atmospheric restaurants. And so, what I wanted to do to make this video different from everyone else is offering more specific observations about things that I thought were interesting that nobody else is likely to mention. I did skim through a lot of vlogs to see what other people's impressions were, but for the most part, it was a lot of people exclaiming how amazing each experience was. Which, yes, for much of the park that is true, but it doesn't actually get into the specifics of why this park is so often exceptional, which is what I'm going into detail on. Returning back to that point about negative reactions though, that's another aspect I want to address, because the park is certainly not perfect, and even has a few aspects that I feel are outright negligent oversights. A lot of people have also been hyping up this park to be something that it was never intended to be, and so I think it's important to keep your expectations in check, understanding that this was never going to have the depth of theming of parks like Tokyo Disney Sea or even Animal Kingdom, while still providing absolute top-tier experiences in other areas of theme park design. This video isn't just about reviewing the park and giving my specific impressions on it, but also serves as a warning about the danger of unrealistic expectations. That being said, there's so much good stuff to get into here, and so let's finally talk about one of the most interesting theme parks to ever exist. Hey, just a quick favor, but videos like these take a lot of time to produce, so if you'd like to support the channel, you can help boost the video by leaving a like, and if you haven't subscribed, especially when I'm so close to hitting 150,000 subscribers as of writing this video, I would appreciate that too. When discussing Epic Universe, what better place to start than by walking up to the Kronos, the park icon that ties everything together thematically. Honestly, it's not as impressive as I expected it to be in person, but it's still an interesting kinetic piece that connects all the portals it lands together as the conduit of Celestial Park, the land that works as the hub. Walking through the portal and up to the overlook with the Luna statue, Celestial Park is designed with sightlines and kinetic movement in mind, allowing you to observe a carefully crafted landscape of fantastical cosmic elements and fountains, while looking out to the Grand Helios Hotel that looms over the park. The water features actually begin here at the front with these water towers, with the water cascading down shelves into the center of the park, where fountains dance and play. When Universal said that they were putting the park back into theme park, they really meant it, creating a well-manicured and beautiful landscape of trees and extensive flower beds among all the water features. It reminds me quite a bit of the extensive gardens often found in European theme parks, and it really subverts your more traditional theme park design. I do think there is something fundamentally interesting about an entry land with shops like Main Street USA or Islands of Adventure's Port of Entry, but I otherwise like how Celestial Park subverts this and creates a wide open and incredibly pleasant area. The soundtrack for Celestial Park is also fantastic because it's very layered, with different pieces playing throughout different areas to convey different emotions. In your more relaxed, intimate areas, the music might be quieter and more subtle with the heavy use of synthetic instrumentation, but in areas where there are grand visual reveals, the music is often orchestral and thunderous, conveying a sense of optimistic excitement. A criticism I've seen from people is that Celestial Park is pretty, but a bit generic, and to an extent, I do agree that the buildings suffer from the current minimalism trend in architecture. However, the entire land is tied together with an aesthetic that reminds me of 19th century World's Fairs with a cosmic twist, and even the way the buildings are laid out through the gardens reflects this as well. I think this is a neat bit of inspiration that no one else is really highlighting, and if you're not stepping into the thematically unique shops and restaurants, you're also missing a lot of what Celestial Park has to offer. Near the entrance, Otherworld's Mercantile is your big shop with a collection of merchandise from everywhere else in the park, just like you would find at Universal Studios Florida or Islands of Adventure, meant to satisfy those last-minute purchases on the way out of the park. In the center of the store, there is an interesting spinning kinetic globe under a rotunda of constellations, and the walls are lined with archways of brick, with each section of merchandise represented by a mural of the land that they came from, as if plucked from each respective world. Admittedly, this store has some fun features, but is still a bit generic, but it does lead into Celestial Suites, which is designed to look like the airship of an original park icon, Captain Cacao. Located on all the packaging for the park's suites, Captain Cacao is a bear who has traveled through different portals and worlds, acquiring and displaying the different sweet treats he has found, which I think is a neat bit of lore. Just like Port of Entry, where you can spot different artifacts from different islands brought back by explorers, Celestial Park is mostly the same, but with a cosmic theme, and you can see how different elements from different worlds were incorporated into it. From the flux capacitors on the back of the trains of Stardust Racers, to a piece of lore related to Volcano Bay that I can't quite recall the details of but is found somewhere in Celestial Park, it is a cosmic hub of exploration, littered with souvenirs from far-off worlds. Another good example of this is on the other side of the entrance, where two shops, the Sensorium Emporium and North Star Wintry Wonders, combine to create another large retail space that is thematically based around exploration. The Sensorium side of the store is a bit generic and is anchored by an industrial-looking telescope, but Wintry Wonders is more interesting, working as the park's Christmas store and drawing you in through a fake flurry of snow that occasionally goes off in front of the doorway. Inside though, the theme of collecting souvenirs from different worlds is reinforced through a few different notable details, including a toy assembly conveyor belt with elements of the Macy's Holiday Parade that travels through Universal Studios Florida. The store also has a few references to Earl the Squirrel, a beloved original character who makes appearances throughout the holiday tribute stores, and even now has his own lore and backstory. To see him in here, which is a deeper thematic cut that only hardcore fans of the Florida Universal Parks will know, shows that Universal is not just building for general audiences, but also catering to park fans who really notice and appreciate the smaller details and storytelling elements. Over by the Super Nintendo World portal, the Nintendo Superstar store mixes that cosmic World's Fair theme with Nintendo elements, and while not the most interesting space, still does reinforce the theme of exploring and collecting souvenirs. I like these stained glass depictions of Nintendo icons, and they even include references to Legend of Zelda characters. A lot of people have widely speculated that this means that they're coming to the park as a future expansion, but considering how Celestial Park has artifacts from all over the place, including other parks, I very much doubt that this is confirmation of this IP coming specifically to Epic Universe. Normally, I don't often talk about theme park restaurants unless they're distinctly remarkable, but in the case of Epic Universe, they all feel like attractions in and of themselves through their interesting theming. The least compelling of these is Meteor Astropub, which, if I tell you that they specialize mostly in burgers, I think you'll realize the clever pun hidden in the name. Inside though, while pleasant, it is the more generically themed of the restaurants here, focusing thematically on the citizens of Celestial Park who ride comets, which makes sense as it's located right outside of Stardust Racers. I've tried as many restaurants as I could in the park, but this is one I still have yet to order from. At the time of visiting, the Blue Dragon Pan-Asian restaurant wasn't open, but I did try the other sit-down option, Atlantic, which, as you can guess from the name, is themed to the ocean and has a menu consisting mostly of seafood. The food was good, but not great for inflated theme park prices, but where Atlantic stands out to me is through the theming. Appropriately located on the water, you enter on the second floor to the nautical-themed bar area, and descending down the staircase into the dining room, you're treated to excellent views of the cascading waterfalls and fountains. Up near the ceiling, there's a slow-moving conveyor of mechanical fish, which is a fun thematic detail that tries to convey that you're dining under the waves. In contrast, another interesting restaurant is the Oaken Star Tavern, which specializes in barbecue, but has a terrestrial forest theme instead. I didn't eat here, but did pop in to observe the theming, and I really like both the forest motif and the incorporation of animals, which makes this a place I really want to eat in just for the atmosphere. Tying into the Celestial Park theme, I did not hear the full story, but from the snippets I did, I believe the restaurant came to be after an owl fell into a tree trunk and through a portal, finding himself and his animal friends who followed to save him in Celestial Park. If Meteor Astropub covers space, Atlantic the ocean, and Oaken Star the earth, then Pizza Moon covers, well, obviously the moon. The sign itself is clearly a reference to A Trip to the Moon, a 1902 French film adaptation of Jules Verne's novel From the Earth to the Moon. Inside though, the theming is incredible, designed to look like a Coney Island dark ride from the early 1900s, and if you caught my recent video where I covered early motion simulators, then you'll remember how I referenced A Trip to the Moon attraction from 1901, which clearly inspired the aesthetic here. Characters with a turn-of-the-century amusement park design represent different ingredients used on the pizza, and the actual location, the moon, is amusingly made out of cheese. Back at the counter where servers pick up the pizza though, there's a fantastic kinetic scene of a rocket crashing to the moon, as the so-called pizza royalty act out scenes of making the food. Not only is the pizza here legitimately great, even outside of a theme park setting, but this restaurant is just so aesthetically unique and gives you a taste of what old dark rides might have been like 120 years ago. I like the distinct theme of each restaurant in Celestial Park, but Pizza Moon is the thematic step above the rest, and like all of them, I consider it an attraction because I really enjoy existing within its atmosphere. Speaking of attractions though, Celestial Park contains two rides, and in the center, Constellation Carousel sits under a large dome. What makes this ride notable is that it reinvents the idea of the carousel, where instead of simply rotating in one direction, the different rideable animals, which all represent constellations, pull apart and spin to move all over the place. The ceiling has some fun kinetic elements, and there seem to be a fair few variations of what music plays, which also changes depending on whether it's day or night. From this, the question arises though, does reinventing tried and true technology necessarily result in a better experience? In this case, while the ride system is notably unique, no, I don't think that this is any more entertaining than a more traditional carousel. Also, because this was a preview and not normal park operation, the ride experience was mostly single adults, all awkwardly avoiding eye contact with one another as they turned and faced the other vehicles. So I think I'll need to actually see how it plays with general park crowds before judging its true value. Otherwise though, it's a fine flat ride that adds kinetic movement to Celestial Park, so I'll rate this as a 7 out of 10. The real attraction of Celestial Park is obviously Stardust Racers though. and this just absolutely blew me away. Stardust is by far the best coaster built for a Universal park, and while there seems to be a lot of debate between whether this or Velocicoaster is better, Stardust easily wins for me. I won't deny that Velocicoaster is excellent in terms of theming and has a well-paced layout, but its launches are forceless, and you just float through the inversions, so it's not very exciting to me. People often take my lack of interest in Velocicoaster as some insane take, despite acknowledging that it's a top-tier attraction, but simply, I just don't find that its complete lack of positive G's makes for a good ride experience personally. Velocicoaster does very well with the general park population, especially those that aren't experienced with larger coasters, but where Velocicoaster is lacking in forces, Stardust makes up for it with a significantly more intense experience in terms of what it puts your body through. The transitions between positive and negative G's is excellent, and there are many head choppers throughout the interweaving tracks that have a significantly stronger impact and feel much closer than those similar moments that Velocicoaster is often given praise for. As I've stated many times, Velocicoaster's launches are weak and fail to push you back into the seat, but with Stardust, that's not the case at all. They aren't the most powerful launches I've ever felt, but as the trains leave the station and enter the tunnel, the feeling of being kicked back into the seat and looking at the other train feels very intense. What's notable here is that the tunnel is actually a double launch, where after the first initial push, you coast for a bit, and then get hit by a surprise second kick, sending you up and over the first hill as the music on the train swells. In terms of layout, I don't think that either of the coaster tracks are the best in the state despite being very well paced. I think that honor still goes to Montu at Busch Gardens, but as the trains launch in tandem with the absolutely fantastic soundtrack and the way they play off of each other visually, both on-ride and off, the overall experience might make it the best coaster in the state for me. Not only does it feel really cool to be weaving in and out of the other track with the other train, but the standout element here is the Celestial Spin, creating a truly epic moment that justifies the name of the park, giving you a taste of what Dueling Dragons used to be like. Notably, Stardust Racers is not a dueling coaster because you're not actively confronting the other train, but it's not a true racing coaster either, in that the launches dictate your speed to move in tandem with the other train rather than actually actively racing it, which puts this coaster into an undefined category of its own. In terms of theming, the building is designed almost like a train station, and story-wise, this ride conveys how celestial citizens used to travel through the cosmos on comets, which you can now experience yourself as a visitor to Celestial Park. The premise is simple but effective, and at night, the trains have an excellent lighting design, making it appear as if they are truly comets racing across the stars. While this isn't necessary for a coaster to be great, it certainly helps if part of the track becomes a visual spectacle, almost like a kinetic sculpture, and Universal has a really great track record of doing this, starting with the Incredible Hulk back in 1999. Stardust Racers obviously continues this tradition as the comets race each other along the pathway, which is again another fantastic kinetic element that contributes to the atmosphere of Celestial Park. In terms of which track is better, I prefer green because I think you get better visual play with the other train, but overall, Stardust Racers, no matter which track you choose, is I think the strongest overall experience in the park. It's obviously not as complex as the dark rides, and is a completely different experience, but it's been a long time since I have felt so positively about a new coaster, and I'm going to rate this as a 9 out of 10. The only thing that can make it better is having more than just the one inversion. Stardust may be a spectacle at night, but so is the rest of Celestial Park. As the sun sets, the hub transforms and incorporates even more visual interest, adding lights along the pathways, gardens, and fountains that make for a truly incredible atmosphere. The lighting just on the chronostructure itself is a standout element, and if you look to the portals, they all have a beam of light that fires into the sky, connecting in the middle with 2 beams from the Chronos, signifying that it's the machine that keeps them open to visitation. There's a lot to Celestial Park that makes it great, from the kinetic movement everywhere to the cosmic flourishes on the buildings. But to wrap up the land, I do briefly want to talk about the Grand Helios Hotel, which looms over everything. Many people have expressed issues with how the hotel was chosen to be a visual focal point, not necessarily because it's a hotel, but because its design is rather bland. From the front of the park, with the parallax of other structures standing in front of it, it does fit rather well, sitting above everything else almost like a palace. But as you make your way to the back of the hub, while not uninteresting, it could be doing a lot more. If you've seen photos or videos inside, it joins a lot of other barely themed Hilton-esque hotels built by park chains recently, which is something that I've been extremely critical of in regard to Disney. However, even though Universal has some hotels with decent theming, they've never reached the heights of Disney hotels from the mid-90s and early 2000s, which weren't just well themed, but also have a strong degree of cultural depth. Universal has never attempted to do this, so I can't criticize them for taking a different approach to their resorts, but I do agree that more effort could have been put into the theming or decoration, at least on the exterior, to make it feel a little less like contemporary corporate design. Still, despite a minimalist aesthetic being a negative found throughout the buildings of Celestial Park, their cosmic flourishes and other strengths of the land more than counter it, and overall, I love what Celestial Park is doing here, working as a well thought out thematic glue that ties all the different lands and intellectual property together into a cohesive experience. The first land that I want to explore is Super Nintendo World, which for the most part is designed almost exactly like the version of the land that opened first in Japan, except you now take an escalator to the second level, which is the entry. This is the land that I was least interested in, because despite how well it's designed, I've already experienced the version in Hollywood, even if it is smaller and less complete. That said, there are significant differences, as the true version of the land has 2 main levels and additional interactive features. If you were previously not aware, Super Nintendo World features a paid power-up band, which not only tracks how many coins you earn and what blocks you've hit, but also allows you to play the interactive challenges that earn you keys. Once you earn 3 of them, you're able to unlock an additional minigame where you fight Bowser Jr. In Hollywood, there are 4 key challenges, but in Epic, there are 5, which includes the Ba-Bomb Kaboom room that's missing from Hollywood. The Epic version of the land also contains notable interactive features such as a skill-based slot machine room and a series of interactive note blocks, where hitting them as they light up, you play through the notes until you unlock the song. The interactive features of the true version of the land are also spread out appropriately, and not just sort of randomly placed in wherever they seem to fit, as was the case with the land in Hollywood. So even though I like both, the Hollywood version is very obviously inferior. While fundamentally the same ride, I also actually prefer the Epic version of Mario Kart Bowser's Challenge because the queue is just simply more cohesive. I do like how, in Hollywood, the queue starts by walking you through a Yoshi themed section, as that park lacks the actual Yoshi ride, and it brings you upstairs to enter Bowser's castle. However, in Epic, you're already on the second level, and enter the castle directly, which leads into a hall of Mario Kart trophies, immediately introducing you to the theme of the ride, which then proceeds into Bowser's library. It just feels more cohesive here, whereas in Hollywood, with the more limited space, queue elements are just smashed together, with the trophies just kind of sitting out in the library. Also worth noting is that when actually on the ride in Epic, the gameplay felt a little bit more responsive and punchier, so I think it's had some subtle software improvements that make this a better version of the ride, despite them both essentially being identical. Returning back to that theme of expectations that I mentioned in the intro of the video though, I actually want to express how surprised I am about how polarizing Mario Kart has been as an attraction. Yeah, by this point it's old news if you actively keep up with the industry, but for many people on the east coast of the US, this will probably be their first experience with Super Nintendo World and Mario Kart, so I think it's appropriate that I set you up with the right expectation if you haven't been on it. To start, what makes Mario Kart interesting and innovative is that despite being a slow-moving ride, it simulates the sensation of speed through screens, projection effects, and most importantly, the augmented reality of the visor you wear in front of your eyes while riding. There are many people who aren't giving this attraction a chance because they're adamant that it needed to be a high-speed dark ride, which is unfeasible for visual storytelling, or even a roller coaster, which is absurd. It's clear that the intent behind this ride was to make it family-friendly and inclusive to smaller children, with an emphasis on the gameplay where you target and throw shells at Team Bowser, while also earning additional coins for turning the steering wheel when arrows appear in front of your visor. Including a gameplay element in a Nintendo attraction seems very obviously appropriate, and there are way too many people trashing this ride because it isn't something that it was never going to be. On the other hand, I do think there are valid complaints about the gameplay not really working, in the sense that it's confusing and just not very intuitive. I've discussed this topic about gameplay in dark rides a few times before, but I've come to the conclusion that if it's not extremely simple and intuitive, it can often lead to interactive rides becoming duds. I think it's different with shooting attractions moving around physical sets, like the many versions of Buzz Lightyear shooting rides across the Disney parks, or Universal's own Men in Black, where outside of the shooting mechanics, they are just interesting dark rides. In the case of Mario Kart, I agree that the interactive mechanics are not intuitive, and actually have a small learning curve that is often lost in the pre-show segments of the queue, even though they are lengthy and thorough. A lot of people don't understand that they have a limited number of shells to throw, or that they can simply aim by just looking around. If you know nothing about the Mario IP and its characters, I can also see how someone might be confused by what enemies to aim towards, and generally, the media on the AR visor can also be a bit visually overwhelming. For me, Mario Kart is a lot like Transformers The Ride 3D, where my first impression was to be overwhelmed, but I came to like it more and more as I rode and learned the beats of the ride. I'm not fully decided on whether this is a negative aspect of ride design, where the experience gets better through repeated exposure because it started off as a lot of chaos and overstimulation, but as someone who understands and is familiar with Mario Kart, I like the ride quite a lot, especially because I think its physical sets and moving figures saves it from its gameplay faults. If you go into the ride with the expectation that you need to pay attention to the instructions to do well, and that it takes a moment to process the visual overload, it is, in my opinion, a really strong attraction if you take it for what it is. Mario Kart may have been my least anticipated ride at Epic, but it still has an extremely well designed and humorous queue, along with strong dark ride aspects that stand out even if you don't understand the gameplay, earning this a solid 8 out of 10. While I believe that the Japanese design for Super Nintendo World is very clearly superior to the Hollywood iteration, I think it's also clear that it works less well in the Florida climate, and Universal should have anticipated some of the challenges here. There's a story I heard a long time ago about when Magic Kingdom was being built, Disney Imagineering painted Main Street USA to be a similar color palette to the version in Disneyland, and everything looked off. It was quickly discovered that in the Florida climate, light from the sun hits differently than in Southern California, and so Main Street had to be repainted with different shades to better fit the environment. While Super Nintendo World and Epic is plenty bright and vibrant, something about it feels off, especially compared to the Hollywood version, and I think it's suffering from that same exact painting problem. That's not to say that the land doesn't look great, but it lacks that distinct visual pop, which seems like poor planning from Universal. Florida is also brutally hot because of how the humidity changes how your body handles heat. And while I understand why Universal essentially copy and pasted the Japanese version of this land to Epic, I think there are oversights in heat management that could have been included. For example, looking at many of the flat surfaces of the blocks that make up the land, I'm seeing opportunities to hide fans in there behind painted grates with small, barely discernible openings, creating airflow throughout a land that desperately needs it. I'm sure this isn't as simple as I'm suggesting, because there's probably plenty of infrastructure hidden in the walls, but I'm disappointed that Universal did not take measures to counter the heat in here, which, considering that I experienced this park in the spring, I'm sure that the heat will be absolutely brutal here in the summer. That leads into the next attraction, Yoshi's Adventure, which I expected to like a lot more than I did. To start off positively, I do like the queue because it's air conditioned and quiet, with its visual style reminding me a bit of the Cat in the Hat queue in Seuss Landing. While there isn't much, there are interactive blocks and elements inside here as well, which adds further value to purchasing a power-up band. The premise of Yoshi's Adventure is that you board the back of a Yoshi, searching for colored eggs, and eventually rescuing Captain Toad. The ride is extremely short with only one indoor scene, but before I experienced it myself, I anticipated that I would like it a lot more than I did. People online are calling this the people mover of Nintendo, and I do get where that comparison is coming from as a slow-moving scenic ride. In a past video, I believe I compared this ride to the High in the Sky Seuss Trolley train ride, which, like the people mover, is a gentle scenic ride with pleasant views and some fun scenes. However, it's clear that the Sky Seuss Trolley is fundamentally different, because while I wouldn't say that it moves quickly, it at least moves fast enough to produce a breeze, while also having a cover that mostly keeps you out of the sun. In the case of Yoshi's Adventure, it's an extremely poor fit for the Florida climate, as you just slowly bake out in the sun, and there's just not enough visual interest in the scenes to justify riding it in such miserable conditions. To collect the colored eggs, you press the corresponding eggs on your lap bar, which light up when you pass one in a scene, but the sun is so bright that it's actually quite difficult to see. I understand that there's nothing Universal could really do to modify the ride experience without completely changing the land, but this is still a negative experience, and as the only ride that I dislike in the park, I'm going to rate it as a 3 out of 10. Walking from the Mario themed section of the land and into Donkey Kong Country, I like the aesthetic contrast of the land, and it's instantly a lot cooler as it's not all paint and concrete. There is fun visual kineticism as the minecarts from Minecart Madness cycle around the mini-land, but otherwise, it does actually feel a bit empty here. There is a small merchandise shop with funkies flying by, the Bubbly Barrel, which sells a themed banana float, and a future meet and greet space for Donkey Kong, but otherwise, I feel like there's a lot of missed potential here. Even the interactive elements are limited, pretty much allowing you to either collect the 4 letters that spell Kong, or just playing the one minigame. That said, the game, which requires you to hit drums in sync with other players, does have a pretty cool reward as Rambi the Rhino emerges from his crate if you and the other players are successful. The land mostly exists to work as dressing for Minecart Madness though, and as a ride, I'm really mixed on the experience. It's certainly innovative, using a completely new ride system to make it appear as if your minecart is jumping tracks, like in the Donkey Kong Country games, and the ride does have a fair number of cool scenes with fun figures, even if they are pretty brief. However, one big issue is that the ride can be very rough at certain points. Imagine that we're driving together in a car at 30 miles an hour, and I slam as hard as I can on the brakes. And then I do it again, and again, and again, throwing you forward each time. There are certain segments of Minecart Madness that feel exactly like this, and while it doesn't ruin the overall ride, it's more just weird, and I assume is an issue with such a strange ride system. Otherwise though, the ride experience is a very solid family coaster that I like a lot, but the issue dragging the ride down is its absolute trash capacity. For whatever reason, Universal and Nintendo seem to be skeptical about how popular a Donkey Kong ride would be, and designed it with the capacity of something like Flight of the Hippogriff. When I look at this ride though, which has a new innovative ride system, plenty of cool scenes, and an entire mini-land built around it, this looks like an e-ticket to me, and I'm sure many other people see it that way as well, creating demand for an attraction that is simply not able to handle it. On top of the line absolutely crawling, Minecart Madness also has one of the worst queues I've ever been through, with very little to look at other than gold-painted walls. There are a few elements here and there that are worth noting, such as these Kong figures venerating a banana, and one painting is actually a fun reference to the first level of the original 1981 Donkey Kong game. There's some light interactive elements if you're a completionist for the power-up band, and admittedly, there is a scene with really cool figures of Cranky Kong and Squawks about halfway through the line. But otherwise, the queue is just gold-painted wall after gold-painted wall, and it's one of the worst queues I've ever seen built for a Universal ride, which is made worse through how slowly the line moves. I'm conflicted on how I feel about the attraction because the ride portion is excellent, but its poor capacity planning and outright bad queue is going to make this a 6 out of 10. You can really see how skeptical Universal seemed to be about its popularity throughout the land as well, and I think it could really benefit from additional interactive and kinetic features that I hope come in the future. There's nothing really wrong with Donkey Kong Country, but it just feels like there's a lot of missed potential here. Moving on, the next portal to move through brings us to How to Train Your Dragon Isle of Berk, which starts with a grand reveal of the island and its Viking statues as you walk out to the lagoon. Berk is by far the largest of the lands, and where it excels is through its details and kinetic elements. Everywhere you look, there's well thought out placement of props and buildings that sell that this is a living, breathing place. And of course, you're going to see dragons just about everywhere. This ranges from static figures, to tails hanging out of dragon houses that swing as they're sleeping, and to actual animated figures that dot the land and add life to it. Some of these are mechanically very simple but effective, but others are actually quite stunning, with the Snow Wraith being particularly impressive. This is something that would feel ambitious for a ride, and yet it's just out here in the land for anyone to observe while walking by. The land also has a few interactive features, such as a toothless contraption that you move by spinning a wheel, or this fountain in the village center, which is a great way to cool off by sticking your hands into the water streams. There are also roving characters from the films that add a ton of life and are very fun to interact with, and it really shows how important entertainment is in allowing a land to really flourish. This is something that Universal has traditionally done very well with, especially in Universal Studios Florida, where they often have Mardi Gras and Christmas parade performers out in the streets when those events are running. It's not like Disney where they cut pretty much all street characters and have the others hidden behind hours of lines for meet and greets. Universal has taken this a step farther though, and in Berk, they've actually premiered dragons with what appears to be Boston Dynamics robot technology, which come out and greet people every so often. I may have also just criticized Disney for hiding characters behind long lines, but the actual toothless figure that you can meet in Berk is also stunning, and is unlike any other meet and greet that I've ever seen. So I understand why this gets a line, because it's more than justified. While I never saw it during the previews, Universal was also seen testing drone technology with flying dragons for the land. So if that appears on park opening, that's another astounding step forward in entertainment. Food too is a standout throughout Berk, whether it be the mac and cheese cones from Hooligan's Grog and Gruel, which are up there with some of the best theme park snacks I've ever had, to the bowls at Spitfire Grill, which come in paper Viking longboats and are generally pretty good. The standout here is Mead Hall though, which is probably the best quick service restaurant in the park in terms of the quality of the food. I like the theming and atmosphere, and overall, while I enjoyed most of the other restaurants throughout the park, the entirety of Berk is a step above all the others with the food quality that it offers. While there's a lot already going on kinetically in the land, the rides all add to this as well. Unfortunately, Fire Drill is the one attraction in the park that I did not experience because it was either down or had a very long wait when there was so much else that I wanted to prioritize. I can't give it a rating, but people have expressed that it's a lot more fun than it looks, and it has interactive effects when you shoot water at certain targets. It also adds a ton of movement to the land, and is even located right next to the covered dining area for Spitfire Grill, which only elevates the dining atmosphere further. In the back of the land is Dragon Racers Rally, which is your typical Gerstauer Skyfly flat ride, but dressed up in theming as if you're training to ride on a dragon. I do want to point out that I like the entrance structure, which has an animated sheep about to be shot from a giant crossbow, but otherwise, this ride is pure filler meant for capacity. Its cycles are very short, which I understand as the lines can get long, but even if you don't experience this, it adds a lot to the land kinetically. I feel neutral about the attraction, so I'll rate it as a 6 out of 10 because it has its purpose. While I don't think that Berk is for really young children and is more family oriented, it does contain a play area known as the Viking Training Camp. Obviously, I didn't do much more than walk around here, but it fails to meet that high standard that Universal set with Islands of Adventure, creating explorable play areas with a ton of interactive effects and a high level of theming. When DreamWorks Land opened in 2024, the play structures there were incredibly basic and done on the cheap. And while Viking Training Camp is certainly better and has interactive features, it's still reaching nowhere close to the play areas of Islands, so I'm going to rate this as a 5 out of 10. I know that people are going to write me off as being overly critical of a play area that their kids will probably enjoy regardless, but I've seen Universal do much better 25 years ago. Moving on to the e-tickets though, I do want to briefly highlight the Untrainable Dragon, a live performance hosted in a theater in the back of the land. When Epic was being built, I wanted to know everything and every detail about what was happening here, but since this show is an adaptation of the one that opened in Universal Beijing, I instead wanted to know as little as possible. Going in almost completely blind, I was actually very impressed by a lot of the elements of the show, and while I've seen a lot of people describe it as something that's cute for kids, I very much disagree. I think that this is a must-do e-ticket attraction that's far more impressive than people are giving it credit for. Without going into details, I'm going to rate the show as a very strong 8 out of 10. Moving on to the final standout of the land though, Hiccup's Wing Gliders continues the land's theme of training to ride dragons by boarding you on a winged contraption. After dispatching from the station and meeting figures of Hiccup and Toothless, with Toothless being particularly impressive, you're launched uncontrollably throughout the land, where you need to learn to fly. Not only does the coaster add to the already dense visual spectacle throughout Berk, but the coaster is just pure fun, existing as a shorter, milder version of Hagrid's. On the ride, the iconic track from the films, Test Drive, plays throughout the elements, and I like how the ride's few notable scenes elevate this above other coasters. That said, while probably one of the best family coasters ever built, it's not without its flaws. First, the ride entrance starts off well, where you walk through Hiccup's house, which has some fun detail, but once entering the real part of the queue, it does have some thematic elements, but is otherwise a bit sparse, and is also notably lacking shade. Luckily, the capacity on the coaster seems pretty high, but an additional negative I want to add is that in the scene where you pass the sheep, there's dialogue relating to them, but you never actually see them unless you know where to look. With how the coaster rides, your eyes are drawn forward to the track, and so it's easy to miss this scene completely. Another negative for the ride, and this is a big one, is that there are many areas where you can see outside of the park. For example, in the scene where you get stuck in the Gronkle Nest, your train rolls back from a hill where you have clear views of infrastructure from Stardust, as well as the county water treatment plant that sits right outside of Universal property. I think it was a baffling decision not to build a small berm with some trees to hide all of this, and it really takes you out of the experience for this part of the ride since you're not moving very quickly. Overall though, Hiccups is a short but very well executed family coaster, earning this an 8 out of 10. Isle of Berk, for all of its visual interest though, does have a lot of notable issues with sightlines. Many people have pointed out how easily you can see Stardust from many areas of the land, and at one point, we even spotted Super Nintendo World. Near the portal, the backside of a building in Celestial Park could have been hidden better, and the theater for the Untrainable Dragon stands out through its distinctly angular building. I agree that more effort could have gone into stopping the outside world from bleeding in, especially since a lot of this is easily fixable through additional trees and berms, but I want to go back to the theme of managing expectations. If you want to come to this park and nitpick every single sightline, you can certainly do it to your own detriment, but Berk is otherwise offering astounding visual interest elsewhere, and is full of kinetic elements from the rides, to the characters, and to other elements of the land. Hiccups is still a top-tier family coaster, and the Untrainable Dragon, despite the shape of its building, can be forgiven for the caliber of show that's located inside. Berk is certainly no land from Tokyo Disney Sea, but in many areas, it's actually offering a lot more, and if you're taking the land for what it is, rather than going out of your way to look for its flaws, then I think it's apparently clear just how strong the design is, even if I can occasionally see the track from Stardust. Moving back into Celestial Park through the next portal, you now enter the Wizarding World of Harry Potter Ministry of Magic, which, for the sake of simplicity, I'm just going to call it Wizarding Paris. The portal first brings you through a non-magical section of the city, but walking through the Phoenix Arch, you enter Place Cachée, which is essentially the Parisian version of Diagon Alley. Like many things in Epic Universe, the reveal here is accurately described as epic, walking through life-size versions of Parisian buildings. I don't think that any other theme park land comes close to this vertical scale, unless you're counting the floating mountains of Pandora. But here in Wizarding Paris, it also does a great job with forced perspective too, where, looking down through this cluster of buildings, the domes of the Sacré-Cœur Basilica look absolutely massive. Not only is the land itself astounding in its height, but this element convincingly adds a lot of scale and depth to it as well. I look back now to Marvel's Superhero Island, and how it tried to convey height through its stylized skyscrapers, but seeing what Universal has done with Wizarding Paris, I would have loved to have seen it done at this scale, as if you were actually walking through a convincing city, with heroes battling it out with villains on the streets. When Universal announced that the land would stray outside of the traditional Harry Potter timeline, it would instead be based around Fantastic Beasts and where to find them, this was met with a lot of skepticism, especially because those films were received poorly. However, a point that I always like to make is that design will always outshine IP, and I'm really glad that Universal chose this new direction, because I don't think that you need to be familiar with the spin-off franchise to appreciate a magical interpretation of Paris. In contrast to Diagon Alley, it's giving you a different flavor of the franchise, with its cleaner, more organized buildings and streets, and it has a ton of secrets to discover if you go browsing through its shop windows as you explore the land. Focusing on the actual animals of Fantastic Beasts was a great decision too, because it's a motif that you'll find everywhere. For example, above one of the bathrooms, the signs above are contained within frames made to look like the aquatic Grindylow, which sit above stone carvings of mermaids, creating what I would describe as a thematic pun. Wizarding Paris is also full of magical creatures hiding in corners of the land, and they're all actual physical animated figures. Unfortunately, you do need to purchase a wand and perform magic to reveal many of them, in addition to a lot of other really cool effects. But this is also a huge step up from the magic in both Hogsmeade and Diagon Alley, where many of the effects were achieved through screens. With major improvements to this interactive element made for Paris though, it has resulted in changes and additions to the other Wizarding lands, which is a nice upgrade, showing Universal's commitment to improving their experiences over time. Wizarding Paris also has two restaurants, one of which is known as, and bear with me, Café L'air de la Sirène. It's a very pretty space, but I think is still one of the less interesting restaurants of the park. Continuing that magical creatures motif though, if you look up to the detailed decorative panels near the ceiling, you'll spot depictions of many fantastic beasts. The food here was also less interesting than other restaurants in the park, because I would describe it less as French and more like the menu of Panera Bread, which isn't bad, but isn't a standout either. Like Nocturne Alley off of Diagon Alley, Paris has its own dark wizarding section as well, although it is smaller and has fewer interesting elements. However, it does contain the land's other restaurant, Le Goblet Noir, and I like how this takes on a darker and more intimate theme, bringing you into what I think are catacombs being used as a winery. At least, that's part of what's going on here, because each room is decorated differently, and all of them are full of detail, which makes this environment a lot more interesting to me. Both times that I walked in here, it seemed like the restaurant was pretty empty, so I think it's struggling to get people in the door because it's kind of hidden despite its massive size, but I actually really like how quiet it is in here away from the crowds. The menu is somewhat Central and Eastern European inspired, but with a heavy emphasis on German food, and overall, I would say the quality is pretty decent for theme park food, and is certainly better than most of what you can find in Epcot's Germany pavilion as a comparison. Like Berg, the entertainment really stands out here too, which includes an interactive portrait, a group of traveling students who are really entertaining to watch as they react to all the magical effects around the land, and by what I believe is supposed to be the entrance to the French Ministry of Magic, there's a shady looking character in a suit who wanders around. Although I didn't interact with him, so I don't know whether he's a villain or just a Ministry spy. I think the best streetmosphere comes from the swing band though, which fits wonderfully into the land as it takes place in the 1920s, and I can't get over the puff scheme that accompanies them and bops to whatever they're playing. You might recall a video I made a while ago where I highlighted that the Wizarding World needs both better entertainment and a dedicated sit-down show. And not only does Wizarding Paris offer a lot more streetmosphere than the other lands, but it has an ambitious standout attraction with Le Cirque Arcanu. Located inside the conspicuous circus tent that screams for your attention in the middle of the street, like the Untrainable Dragon, this is another e-ticket show that really impressed me. After wading through the deceptively expansive queue, which tries to convey the idea that an entire big top is magically hidden inside the smaller tent in the street, you enter the pre-show, which delivers essential exposition. Introducing you to some of the characters from the show, they perform a bit of wizarding magic, which is achieved through what are essentially parlor tricks. It's fairly obvious how these are done, but through the theatrics of the pre-show, it's actually very convincing, and the crowd is led into the theater to sit down and watch the circus. Watching through the different acts, I was initially underwhelmed, but I think that this is by design, because the narrative takes a sharp turn and the stage completely transforms in a stunning surprise moment, making the stakes of the narrative a lot more intense and pivoting thematically towards fantastic beasts, resulting in a much more exciting show. I like that Le Cirque Arcanu embraces the Fantastic Beasts franchise, because again, Universal created an outstanding attraction where the quality far exceeds the source material. I don't think the show is perfect, and having seen it twice, I do think it has some pacing issues and is somewhat less entertaining on a repeat viewing, but this is still very much worth going out of your way to experience as one of the top attractions in the park, earning this a solid 8 out of 10. Returning back to the name of the land, the Wizarding World of Harry Potter, Ministry of Magic, Paris is actually anchored by a highly ambitious dark ride that takes you to the British Ministry of Magic. I understand why the land is named the way it is for the purpose of marketing, and possibly because there was a French ministry attraction that was cut, which explains why one end of the land feels a bit empty. However, the main attraction begins as you enter the Metro Flue, where through a really clever fog effect, you travel through space and, weirdly, time to the British Ministry of Magic, almost immediately after the end of the main Harry Potter series. Walking out into the atrium, this is by far the largest room ever built for a queue, and you'll quickly learn from the large banner that the new Minister of Magic is Kingsley Shacklebolt, and that Dolores Umbridge is on trial for her crimes against the Wizarding World. This may be the largest room, but the scale of the rest of the queue is also often remarkable, and it has many memorable elements as you travel through different areas and departments of the Ministry. One notable room that I found interesting contained the portraits of former Ministers of Magic, and comedically, the original Minister is portrayed through a bust. It doesn't look as good on camera, but his face physically moves in sync with a projection effect, which looks great in person, and his comedic banter makes him a standout figure. Other notable queue elements includes this magical vacuum, the locker room for Aurors, which is located right outside of their offices, which makes for an interesting part of the queue itself, and a trip through Umbridge's office, where you meet her former house elf, Higgledy, who becomes an essential character in the ride. Notably, Battle at the Ministry was not running for most of the preview window, and I think I just happened to go on the right day and be there at the right time to ride it. At that time, the ride was being handled through a virtual queue, which seemed frustrating to use, but luckily, my party and I were able to get a return time and were able to ride. I've seen a lot of reviews and impressions praising this as the best dark ride ever produced, and while a lot of it is very impressive, I do think that a lot of people are being incredibly hyperbolic. Battle at the Ministry feels very much like Spider-Man or Transformers, but what distinguishes it is that it has many physical effects and animated figures that blend in with the screen media, sometimes making it difficult to distinguish what is and is not real. Some of the scenes feel absolutely massive in scale, and the figures are very technically impressive, including an astoundingly large Fantastic Beast in one scene that continues Paris' theme of magical creatures. Despite its often large sets and technically impressive effects, along with a really fun ride vehicle that throws you around for a lot of thrill, it reminds me a lot of Transformers, in the sense that it's all very chaotic and overwhelming. I can see this ride becoming something that I enjoy more over time with repeated ride-throughs as I learn its narrative beats, but as of now, I'm going to rate this as an 8 out of 10, rising to about the same entertainment level as Harry Potter and the Forbidden Journey. It's a strong attraction with an extremely ambitious queue and many innovative ride elements, so I'm sure that your average park guest will love it, but it's very much another Universal thrilling simulator attraction, which I think is actually fine for Epic Universe, considering how it's the only attraction of this category in the park. Looking at Wizarding Paris more broadly, I think that a lot of people were ready to dislike it because of its Fantastic Beasts theme, but I'm glad that it really embraced it, creating what I think is an exciting new flavor of the Wizarding world, and proving that putting effort into creative experiences pays off, regardless of the relevance of an IP. It does have an empty corner that feels a bit strange, but since this is rumored to be future expansion space, I'm excited about the possibility of what else this land could offer. I'm also hoping that with such an excellent show with Le Cirque Arcanu, that Universal seriously considers other entertainment options for Hogsmeade and Diagon Alley, especially since both lands sit next to unused space that are perfect for expansion. Reaching the final end of the park, and the one that I was most excited to experience, Dark Universe is actually the weakest of the lands that the park offers. That's not to say that it's bad, far from it, but as I suspected, the land is incredibly small, and I think it's because Universal was unsure of how a permanent horror-themed land would endure over time. The reveal of the village of Darkmoor is done well, first twisting you through a graveyard, and revealing the village with Frankenstein Manor sitting off in the back. My issue with Darkmoor is that there's just not enough detail here, and in the village, there's just one small shop and a restaurant, Das Steakhouse. That said, the atmosphere inside is fantastic, as you dine among the familiars of vampires, and this is already one of my favorite theme park restaurants, despite having mixed opinions on the food. I have eaten here twice, so I'll recommend that if you make the choice to come, order a fork and knife dish, which are all really good, but avoid anything with a black bun. Not only was the sandwich that I tried incredibly mediocre, but the black dye was extremely agitating to my stomach for the next 2 days, which is a similar experience that many other people I've spoken to have confirmed as well. In my opinion, all of the sandwich options need to be completely reworked, but to otherwise praise the strengths of the restaurant, I do like the gruesome presentation of the other food, and the decor was extremely fun, especially with the staked vampires resting in the walls. Notably, the servers play the role of familiars to the vampires, and so they're appropriately creepy, staring you in the eye as they pour blood-red sauce on your steak, and stepping away without a word. I'm concerned that the general park guests will complain that the staff are rude, and that they'll be forced out of theme, but I really hope that isn't the case, because thematically, this restaurant really is something special. Stepping back out into the land, I enjoy its foreboding aesthetic, and existing under the thraldom of the vampires, you'll see violent elements, including a spiked well where victims are impaled for vampires to drink from, and this bench near the bathrooms where some brutal act seemed to have occurred. In the graveyard, there's an entrance to catacombs that are related to the story of Frankenstein Manor in Monsters Unchained, and throughout the land, it is dotted with fun Easter eggs referencing Universal's classic monster films. However, there just isn't really as much detail or explorability as I would like, and I think that the village needs more, whether something like a small walkthrough attraction or even a larger themed store. Walking past the village, and even past Frankenstein Manor for now, the pathway creates a loop where you can either experience Curse of the Werewolf or discover the Burning Blade Tavern. Based on the burning windmill from the original Frankenstein film, every 15 minutes, a bell tolls in the village and the music begins to swell outside of the tavern, building to a climax and resulting in the blades catching fire. This is a clever and visually fantastic effect that's actually quite easy to see during the day, although, as you would guess, it looks better at night. When night falls upon Darkmoor, the mist from the vampire well glows a bloody red, and Frankenstein Manor, which is drawing power from the village, is an even stronger visual spectacle. A lot of people have been claiming that Darkmoor is undeniably better at night, but despite these individual elements that I've highlighted, I actually think that it's not nearly as interesting as you would anticipate. What little detail there is gets lost in the darkness, and I expected the atmosphere of the village to be more vibrantly spooky rather than just dark. You know, like in the sense that it's just not lit very well. On a positive note, like with Isle of Berk and Wizarding Paris, the entertainment in Darkmoor is also a standout, where you'll meet various monsters who all have opinions on the experiments being run in the manor. The Bride of Frankenstein feels negatively, since her inception was the result of unethical experiments, but on the other hand, Igor will travel the land, searching for hidden rubber body parts and essentially grave robbing to assemble another monster. A storyteller with a violin sings musical tales about the events surrounding the village, and the Invisible Man also roams, who somehow enchants people through his arrogant personality but strong charisma. Inside the Burning Blade Tavern, which works as a gathering spot for monster hunters, a roaming character will sometimes walk around the bar, sharing tales of his dangerous encounters and riling up the crowd, which you can imagine is quite effective in a room where everyone has been drinking. I like the interior of the Burning Blade, and along the wall, there are mounted heads of slaughtered creatures, including less popular science fiction monsters, which I think is a fun reference. Also, is that the Ripley's Believe It or Not mermaid hoax just sitting behind the bar? While the drinks and small plates of this location are great, unfortunately, there's a ton of reverberation that travels throughout here, which makes it extremely loud and unpleasant. I wanted this to be a dark, cozy, and quiet place to have some drinks, but the bad acoustics compromise the atmosphere, even if there's not a ton of people in here, so the experience is mixed. Traveling away from the Burning Blade into Curse of the Werewolf, I'm also very mixed on this as well. Initially, I thought that the coaster would be Dark Universe's version of Flight of the Hippogriff, but I was actually quite surprised I found the coaster to be a lot more forceful than I anticipated. That being said, other people have expressed being underwhelmed. I think your experience can be dramatically different depending on how your car is weighted, and subsequently how much it spins. As someone who is often disappointed by how few rotations I usually get on spinning coasters, Curse of the Werewolf was actually fantastic for me on both rides that I got, because my experiences were quite aggressive, but I understand why someone else might feel underwhelmed if their ride-through was different. I'm not really sure if I understand the story of the attraction even after it was explained to me, but what I think happens is that you encounter a wagon camp of traveling mystics who conclude that you bear the mark of the werewolf, and send you in a wagon off into the forest to escape. I don't think this is really a spoiler because it was included in the marketing of the ride, but there's a portion where you fly through a shack where you encounter werewolves, and enter a swing launch where you encounter them a few more times as if being attacked. I thought that they were fairly obvious, but other people reported not seeing them at all, so maybe you just have to know to look for them. Also, the concluding scene where you meet Maleva, who is one of the chief mystics, is incredibly awkward. Waiting to return to the station, this scene has a static mannequin pose with her arms sticking out, with an exposed, unthemed speaker clearly sitting at her feet, allowing her to speak some dialogue. Depending on what direction your car is facing, you might not even see her at all, which makes it all the more bizarre. I never thought that I would say this, but I would rather the scene just be on a screen instead, and it's clear that this is where the budget for the ride ran out. When Epic Universe was initially revealed, the concept art depicted Dark Universe with what appears to be a show in this space instead. I assume that it was scrapped last minute, and so Curse of the Werewolf became its replacement, which is why the budget feels really stretched here. The experience does feel hastily thrown together, and a lot of people have complained about the extensive safety netting that went up around the track last minute. I don't actually mind how this looks, and I don't actively notice it while walking by, but I do agree that a lot more money and effort could have gone into at least hiding the coaster with theming elements and mitigating safety issues through means other than such extensive netting. Maybe I'll feel differently once the trees grow in better, but I also don't think that the landscaping really sells the idea of a forest, which I think could actually be a lot more extensive and add a lot of shade to the land. This area and the pathways surrounding the coaster could really benefit from allowing you to walk under a dark canopy created by larger trees, and subsequently, would also enhance the village with a dark forest working as its background. Curse of the Werewolf, despite how much I enjoyed its layout, unfortunately fails to meet the theming standards across the rest of the park, and while I understand why that's the case, I think that if you're going to commit to such an ambitious theme park, then you need to commit all the way, earning this attraction a 6 out of 10, if only because I liked how much my cars were able to spin. This now brings us to the final attraction inside the park, which I know throughout the theme park community is also the most anticipated. Monsters Unchained: The Frankenstein Experiment is undoubtedly one of the most ambitious theme park attractions to ever exist, and walking into the manor, you're instantly hit with visceral excitement. If I could describe the atmosphere inside, I would unironically tell you that it's electric, which, yeah, I get that electricity is a thematic element of the manor and the ride, but I also think that's the best way to describe the feeling of the queue. As you walk through, you witness remnants of the experiments of Victoria Frankenstein, the great-granddaughter of the original Henry Frankenstein. One of the rooms is dedicated to her analysis of creating new life, actually displaying the original monster, distinguishing that the one you'll meet later is Victoria's own creation. Another room later in the queue documents her and Igor's expeditions to capture the other monsters for experimentation, and not too far past this, you'll encounter Victoria's ultimate prize, where you'll view Dracula trapped in the form of a bat. The queue is never gory, although still manages to be gruesome, and on moving across an upstairs balcony and past the portrait of Victoria herself, you're funneled into the library where you watch the first segment of the pre-show. Here, you meet with a masked character who addresses you as a lab rat, and essentially tries to intimidate you into feeling fear. Breaking out into a coughing fit, they release the mask and reveal themselves to be Igor, who tells you that it's his job to get you through the catacombs and back in one piece. Taking control of the kuka in front of you, he describes how you'll be boarding the catacombs navigation unit, and how he will steer you through the tour. It begins to comedically malfunction, but the voice of Victoria comes in over the speakers, telling Igor that she's ready for the guests to enter. The bookshelves of the library swing open like doors, and stepping into the next part of the pre-show, you encounter an animated figure of Victoria herself. She announces that she'll finish what her great-grandfather started, lamenting how he was labeled as a monster for his experiments, and how she'll prove the world wrong. She then reveals her version of the monster, remarking that he's the key to her experiment, and is much better than the original. She explains that she has spent years studying and controlling the monsters of the world, and now she'll take on her ultimate challenge, Count Dracula. At hearing the name, the monster becomes angry and knocks over a Tesla coil, but the atmosphere changes and Dracula casts his spirit into the room to threaten the other monster before quickly disappearing. She remarks comedically that they don't get along as the monster laughs, and continues by stating that with your help, she can control Dracula, and that the world will never see the name Frankenstein the same way again. Yelling for the doors to open, you move into the last part of the queue, where you pass by the lockers and then into a room where you see the remnants of the vessels that carried the monsters here. Dracula was carried in his coffin, Imhotep in his sarcophagus, and then there's a cage, which I believe was probably for the Wolfman. From here, you board the platform to experience the ride, which takes you through the catacombs as the experiment goes wrong, resulting in the release of Dracula and the other monsters, and the chaos that ensues. Before getting on for the first time, I asked a few people what their impressions were of the ride, and the consensus seems to be disappointment. Universal marketed this ride as the scariest attraction ever made, and the most common criticism is that it's just not scary at all, and having been on it, I agree. For comparison, I would say that the dinosaurs in the Jurassic Park River Adventure are far scarier than anything you'll see in this ride. Even with how familiar I am with Forbidden Journey, the Dementors still occasionally get a startle out of me, and I know that a lot of arachnophobes hate the spiders, so even this is a far more intense experience than Monsters Unchained. Going in with that expectation though, I found myself actually really liking the ride because I took it in for what it is. If you want scariness, you're out of luck, but instead the ride is just pure action, totally reflecting something like a comic out of a pulp magazine, which appropriately, there's a lot of merch in the land that reflects this style, so I think that was very much the intent. The ride is also really funny, in the sense that everything that's occurring is just so outright ridiculous, but the characters are also taking it all a little too seriously, creating an ironic degree of humor that makes this ride a lot of fun. I like how Dracula and Victoria are so exceedingly arrogant, which makes the conflict between them humorous, and even this version of the Frankenstein monster is very different, lacking the tragedy of the original, and instead following Victoria's orders like a big clumsy toddler trying to please his mom. Having now been on the ride I think about 7 or 8 times, it has a lot of key moments that just hit really well that make this an instant classic, and if you go in with the right expectations, it's an incredible experience. In the same way that Spider-Man changed the industry in 1999 by showing that rides could put you into the middle of action using screens, Monsters Unchained also innovates by instead taking familiar motion that you might see on a simulator ride and making it physical. Unlike in Forbidden Journey, where your vehicle floats through the castle and is essentially batted around, the profile on the Kukas and monsters feels a lot more reactive, sometimes lurching forward to bring you face to face with a character who is speaking to you, or otherwise recoiling at a monster's encounter in an almost playful way. If there's one big criticism I have of the ride though, it's that it's just not very immersive. Walking through the queue, the ceiling is not themed, and is instead black painted ceiling tiles, which is very 1980s Epcot of them to do. The ride itself reminds me of, well, Spaceship Earth, because there's a liberal use of easily viewed black curtains all throughout the ride track, with a lot of what is in your field of vision not being themed. The monster figures are all very impressive, but with many, you can actually see the metal arms that they extend from, or otherwise see them mounted on black boxes with silver rivets, which can be really distracting. From the first time I rode and to the last, there were improvements made to somewhat hide these, and it's clear that the ride was still being worked on, but even so, I think that there will still be many exposed mechanical elements, which is a fundamental design flaw. Monsters Unchained is not an immersive experience, but is still incredibly strong everywhere else, which outshines its glaring flaws. So to give it a rating, I think I'll give it a strong 8 out of 10. I've seen a lot of people debating whether they prefer Monsters Unchained over the Battle at the Ministry, and I think they're both about equal for me, even though the ride experiences are very different. Whichever you prefer, I think mostly comes down to whichever IP and atmosphere is more interesting to you, although personally, I enjoyed Monsters more. Epic Universe is opening with 3 really strong and industry-shaping dark rides, but they're not perfect. And if you go into these with the expectation that they are life-changing, transcendental experiences that other people have been hyping them up to be, then I think you'll be disappointed. These rides are no doubt innovative and will change the industry just like Spider-Man did, but they are not without flaw, and the extent to which you enjoy them will be about managing your expectations. I think that Mario Kart is an excellent and well-designed ride, but your enjoyment will very much depend on paying attention to how the gameplay is meant to work. Monsters is a great, but not very immersive experience, and the Battle with the Ministry doesn't quite live up to the ambition that it's attempting to shoot for, but is still a really solid attraction regardless. If I had to summarize the attractions of Epic Universe, flaws and all, then I think they would all best be described as pure fun. Well, except for Yoshi's Adventure. But there are so many narrative beats on the rides and in the shows that I want to see again and again, I think that's a testament to their execution. For example, Hiccups isn't really doing anything that Hagrid's didn't already do, but its tried and true design just works to create a really strong family coaster that I can't get tired of. The lands are also standout experiences, with the detail going into them being quite apparent, and making their spaces feel real and lived in. I remember last year, people were making the observation that Tiana's Bayou Adventure uses a lot of digital prints throughout its queue and on the ride, and maybe the average person won't know why things feel a little bit off, but there's an artificiality to it that prevents the environments from feeling completely authentic. Yet when I look at Epic Universe, and let's use Wizarding Paris as an example, you're instead looking at hand-painted art that is distressed and aged, making this feel like a real place that people might be living in, and it really sells the environment. Since we're on the topic of dissing Disney, I want to look at Celestial Park and make the comparison that everyone else has to the new Epcot overhaul. I think that, conceptually, it was a mistake from the beginning, regardless of its execution, but if Disney had even attempted to do it right, Celestial Park is what it would have been, full of fountain features, more carefully thought out landscaping and sightlines, and shops and restaurants that, for the most part, all have distinct character to them. A lot of people have expressed that Celestial Park feels a bit generic, but I think you're also missing out if you're not taking it slower and taking the time to dine and relax here. The more I look at my footage and think about what each venue offers, the more I appreciate the vision, and it's not devoid of detail, because there is a fun cosmic flair if you take the time to look for it. Epic's rides and lands are fantastic, but I also think that it's at least a 2-day park because it's best enjoyed at a leisurely pace. You should take the time to dine in the restaurants and explore the lands, and the entertainment really is innovative in ways that I've never seen before. If you're familiar with my channel and have been watching me for a while, then you'll know that I've been getting sick of everything needing to be based off of a movie or a recognizable IP. With Epic, I feel differently, because it's not the Disney method of looking at your most streamed movies, printing out the results, and then throwing a dart at a board to pick your next attraction, or replacing something that used to be great, but that you left rotting for the past 2 decades. No, each land and property used for Epic were certainly the result of focus groups, but the design philosophy was clearly different. It was handled by people who asked, wouldn't it be cool if we did this, or wouldn't it be cool if we did that, rather than Disney executives trying to turn their parks into billboards of Disney brands at a superficial level. Like, why are the Guardians of the Galaxy even in Epcot's version of Space Mountain? It would actually be better without some annoying contrived narrative that doesn't even seem to be selling Marvel merch anyways. With Epic, not only are the lands doing justice and immersing you into the land of the intellectual property, but they're interesting regardless of you being familiar with them, which is why I'm buying the authenticity of their worlds. Even as much as I like Celestial Park as an original concept, it couldn't exist without being conceived as the thematic glue for the different portals, ironically resulting in one of the coolest original lands to ever exist. Epic isn't perfect though, and I do think that there are some major flaws that I should point out or are worth reiterating. The largest issue I have with the park is that there are many areas where I think to myself, you just should have built a berm and planted some trees here. The Gronkle Scene on Hiccups could certainly use it, and there are small sections of Berg that would also benefit from this as well. I also think that the area near Curse of the Werewolf should have leaned heavily into creating a shady forest, which won't happen even once the trees grow in, and near the metal detectors at Stardust, you can clearly look across and see the unthemed outside of the buildings in Wizarding Paris. Another aspect of the park that I feel negatively about is mobile ordering, which is something that has already slowly rolled out at the other parks. The idea behind it is that you sit down at a restaurant and scan a QR code at the table, which opens the Universal app and allows you to place an order that is then brought out to you. In concept, I like it, but when you have long lines like I've experienced at Minion Cafe, the Leaky Cauldron, or the Three Broomsticks, you're required to wait in line for seats to open, and you order the food on the app in the meantime. This is confusing since Disney's mobile order has trained consumers to think about it differently, where you walk up to a window or counter when your order is ready. But Universal is not really forthcoming with how their version works, and so it's confusing if the parks are busy and you haven't been exposed to it, which was a problem that I encountered the first few times that I tried. If your app isn't working, or if you can't get service or connect to the Wi-Fi, it can also be difficult to find someone to work a register. And ultimately, it's not even saving Universal labor costs, which I think is the idea behind it, as I've witnessed a ton of people serving food when you could have staffed fewer of them to cover registers. Sitting down at a table and ordering from your phone is nice at Epic, since the park wasn't busy during previews, but I've experienced this working poorly at the other parks, and it isn't able to handle the stress that simply staffing people at registers would. I also think that because you feel like you're being served as if it was table service, Universal quietly raised the prices of food significantly all across the resort because it doesn't feel like traditional quick service any longer, even though that's what it is at its core. I liked most of the food at Epic, but I think pricing many of the menu items between $17 to $20 at the lower end is very expensive even by theme park price standards, and it feels very scummy. This is a broader resort-wide issue, but since all the restaurants other than Atlantic are set up this way, it's unfortunately a problematic system that I think will plague the restaurants here once the park officially opens and experiences larger crowds. Still, if this, and wanting more trees planted, are the largest issues of the park, at the very least, these seem very fixable, and Epic has continued to impress me so strongly everywhere else that the impact of these issues are very much diminished. As an opening day park, its lineup is certainly stronger than most others, even Islands of Adventure on its opening day. But for as impressive as it is, Epic Universe was definitely overhyped, and isn't meeting a lot of people's expectations. I really like the dark rides in this park, But if you were expecting some otherworldly experience and cannot enjoy them for what they are, well, of course you're going to be disappointed. I've even seen people express that Stardust didn't live up to what they thought it would be, which seems insane to me because it's just so incredibly well designed, and the experience is undeniably unique. Otherwise, people are disregarding a lot of supplemental attractions as disappointments, which, while they may not reach e-ticket levels, are still doing a lot more than most other parks would. For being the Flight of the Hippogriff of Super Nintendo World, Minecart Madness is still very visually appealing and has some really fun scenes. Or if you look at Le Cirque Arcanu, it's an extremely underrated show that nobody is really talking about, but elevates itself to an e-ticket level. I think that part of the motivation behind people's unrealistic expectations is that many people wanted this park to hurt Disney's business and force the company back on track to genuine creativity. I do think that long-term, Epic will have a detrimental effect on Disney's park attendance, especially since they really seem to be continuing to learn the wrong lessons here. But that topic probably has a separate, entire lengthy video of content to talk about. Overall, Epic Universe is a top-tier theme park that feels like genuine love and care was put into it, resulting in the strongest theme park opening since perhaps Epcot in 1982. I think that Epic still feels a little incomplete and would benefit from additional experiences, but even for the park's flaws, there's still so much here to discover and experience, resulting in something truly groundbreaking in many aspects of the themed industry. In the future, when annual passes are updated to include the park, I think I will eventually do more in-depth videos on the land, because there's still a lot to discuss about them individually, but for now, I hope you found my overview and general review of the park to be interesting. If you made it here all the way to the end and did not leave a like, I would very much appreciate it if you did so. And as always, if you have not yet subscribed and hit the bell notification, you can do so now to be alerted to new videos as they're released.